Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Rouge Rugby podcast, the podcast focusing on real Canadian rugby. I'm Stu Hardy, joined as always by Derek Brissett. Derek, we've had the return of the Premiership last week. The URC is now back on our screens this weekend just gone. Were you able to catch any of those games?
Yeah, I did. I caught a couple of them. It's nice to have it back. I do gotta say, I really enjoy waking up on a Saturday morning at like 8 a.m. and just throwing rugby on. Nice to see the Saracens get off to a hot start. I by hot start, I mean the season, not in the actual game, because they went down 17-0 within like 20 minutes. But they bounced back very nicely. So overall, quite happy with it. Not a huge fan of the orange and blue jerseys though. Orange and blue, like the team, you're red and black. Like, where does the orange and blue come from? It kind of looks nice, but like, I don't like it when teams go with different color schemes for like the away kit. I don't know. Maybe I'm just ranting.
It's clear contrast, obviously. Blue being opposite of red, and then orange being the opposite of black. You know, a light kit to contrast with a darker one. Speaking of
white and red though, like
that. Well, I think they've done like blue and white in the past.
Yeah, I know they've done some weird. They've done, every team I feel like has done some weird random colors at some point.
Well, speaking of black and red, I got to watch the West Wales derby between Ospreys and Scarlets.
Oh, there you go.
It was a very close affair, very back and forth, and find the final conversion of the game, sealing it as a draw. So everyone in Wales is a bit, West Wales at least, less happy than what they could have been. But, you know, it's good to have the URC back, good to have European competition going on as it is. And yeah, soon enough, we'll be into the Champions and Challenge Cup again.
Speaking of the European rugby too, James O'Neill with a nice 45-meter dash for his first try for Melrose on the weekend too.
Yeah, fantastic to get his first start for the team as well. Obviously playing alongside fellow Arrow Mitch Richardson. And you can actually see the video of the try on the Toronto Arrows social media pages. So I saw it on Twitter and I was like, that is just fantastic.
It's a good run.
Yeah. First start, first try. Yeah, it's not as you mean to go on, I guess.
All he has to do is find a hockey rink to get a Zamboni driving job during the week, though. So hopefully that's working out for him. So pretty sure Scotland's got a team in the EIHL, I'm sure. I can't remember which city it's in, though.
Well, there's a lot of curling there. So if all else fails, he can make sure that ice is all nice and smooth.
There you go. That's just for you, Dan. We brought back one curling reference. Hope you're still listening to this at some point.
Well, we're talking about Arrows players. Let's return to the Arrows, so to speak, because we've had, since our last recording, a signing and a trade. So first off, we have Connor Grindle, a prop, is joining the team from Gordon in Australia, but he is Canadian eligible. So he will be marked as a domestic player. And the big news that came out just on Friday is that Travis Larsen has been traded to the Arrows from Seattle. So the Arrows received the player rights from Seattle. In return, Seattle has received salary cap considerations. This is now Travis Larsen's fifth MLR team, but from a Canadian perspective, we're hoping he sticks with this team for the foreseeable future, to say the least. So a prop and Larsen as well. Derek, what do you make of these moves?
Yeah, well, first of all, is Larsen the guy that's played for the most teams at this point? Or is anybody else more than 5 or close to 5?
I don't think so, because that wouldn't have been a player that would have changed every single season.
Yeah, I know. I was going to say we're
started, which has just been 6. So I'm not entirely sure about that, but
so it's crazy. So he played for the Austin Elite. That's how far back that was. Old Glory, San Diego, Seattle, and now Toronto. Can't remember if all of those were trades. He definitely got traded from San Diego to Seattle, and then obviously he's just got traded now. Again, it's one of those trades in the MLR where it's like you give up cap considerations, but we don't actually have the dollar value assigned to that. So you really can't it's tough to judge if you like, overpaid, underpaid, from either team's point of view on that one. But like, I like the move of having Larsen come over. Obviously, when after Travis Larsen got traded from San Diego to Seattle at the end of the 2021 season, he was like one of the best back row players in the league for like the last 3 weeks. He was unreal after that trade. And then, he carried it on in during 2022 as well. He was I thought he was great for Seattle. He was, kind of a big part of their, obviously there's a bit of the shenanigans in the standings and stuff, but he was a big part of their push to the MLR final, losing to New York, right? And I think that's obviously a good thing to have coming into the locker room too, is a guy that's had success in MLR as well, right? Getting to that final, playing in that big environment. So that's obviously a positive to bring over. And it seems like there's between him and Cole Davis, it seems like there's a little bit of a push to maybe be bringing some of the Canadian guys back north of the border that are in MLR currently. So that's obviously a good one. It'll be super fun. The first because you get at least two Free Jacks games. I guess it'll depend on what the schedule format looks like next year. But you're gonna have Travis Larsen and Josh Larsen able to play each other a couple more times, and they're gonna be able to do it at least one, you would imagine, because it's not like New England and Toronto are gonna get the road trip avoid snow game. But so that'll be nice. You're probably going to get at least one of those games in Canada at the very least, Toronto. And so I mean, I'm looking forward to seeing Travis Larsen come back. And then the other signing, obviously, Connor Grindal. Arrows are obviously always on the lookout for these guys and stuff. And Pete Smith is located in Australia. I believe he's located in Australia during the offseason. He's from there originally.
There have been photos of him on social media doing the work in Australia,
with some of the new signings in Australia. So that's obviously a good thing. And obviously finding guys that are playing elsewhere in the world that are Canadian eligible is super key, right? So his father played pretty high level provincial level player in Ontario, right? Played for the Blues, or so I think that's obviously a great thing. You got that little bit of a connection, considering the Arrows' history basically developed out of the Ontario Blues and stuff too, right? In sort of, kind of, in a way, sort of in a way like that. So it's nice to see that they're able to bring some players that are playing overseas back over. The one thing though, I think, with looking at a lot of these new signings is, over the course of the first 4 seasons of the Toronto Arrows, it's like the Arrows were one of the better, one of the teams that had the best retention rate for their players. And so far this offseason, we are seeing a lot of new names coming in, whether that's through trade or through signings, and obviously too, some big names on the way out too, right? As mentioned earlier, in the offseason, you had Mirez retired, Andrew Quattrin got traded.
Just want to clarify, Mirez hasn't announced his retirement; he's just announced his departure.
Yeah, sorry.
He may as well be retired to us, but
yeah, exactly. If you're not on the Arrows, you're retired. And Lesage is retired too. It's how I view everybody.
Well, we said that for Jamie McKenzie, but then look how that turned out. So
well, there's exceptions to
to right? Of course.
Exactly. If your last name's McKenzie, then I assume you never retire. Everybody else, once you leave the Arrows, basically retired. So either way, though. Man, now I lost my train of thought on that entire thing. But you had so you got some players moving out. Quattrin obviously got traded, and then we'll maybe circle back to because he just officially signed with New England this week. So it looks like we might have a little bit of a kind of new look Arrows squad next year. At least it's starting to develop that way. Right. At least as far as the first groups of signings that have come through have seemed to be a little bit heavier on the new faces coming in. versus, re-signings.
Yeah.
And that might be a bit of a marketing thing with how it's being announced, because we know the Arrows carefully plan how they drop all the signing announcements and
Of
stuff.
course, yeah.
So that might have something to do with it too. But yeah, it looks like there's definitely going to be some new faces on the squad, right? And as more signings get announced, it's more interesting to see how it's kind of shaping up. But digging the addition of Travis Larsen, Connor Grindal, and I'm just starting to ever so slightly get more excited for the return of the season, even though there's a full World Cup between now and then that is also there to be excited about. But
yeah, that's fair. I think it's also worth considering that the Arrows are finding these players that are. So I believe that now it's Grindal is like the second player who is from overseas or from Australia specifically, but is Canadian eligible, and therefore is marked as a domestic player.
Nick Ben was the other one.
Yes, that is correct. The thing is to remember is that towards the end of last season, the Arrows had to trade international slots to guarantee salary considerations for the 2022 season. So now obviously every single team is trying to find if they are domestically eligible. So all the basically the non-Arrows MLR teams are trying to find if anyone has an American passport or an American grandparent, so they don't have to go through the rigmarole of visa processing and stuff like that. But at the same time, it obviously helps to find players that are Canadian eligible as well, that can then come over for the Arrows and not worry that international slot eligibility, because I believe at the moment we have Sam Malcolm, we have Goodall.
Don't forget though too, when you're thinking about this, that the Quattrin trade was for an international slot.
That is, yeah. So that's one back. So yeah, so the Arrows currently have 8 international slots, which is at the moment the lowest of any MLR team. But they also had signing of Torrance Reed as well. So that's at least 3 players. Now, obviously, it means 8 in the match day squad. So obviously the Arrows can sign as many as they want, but ideally enough that it would allow players to be able to shuffle around and so on and so forth. So, just considering, I think it's obviously great that they're finding Canadian eligible players, even if it is just to get around that whole regulation of only having 8 players available. But obviously it seems that Grindal has Ontario rugby history in his blood, if his dad and his uncles were able playing for Toronto Welsh, now the Toronto Dragons. I also realized his father's name is spelled Ian, spelled Iain. It's like, well, if that's the most Welsh spelling of Ian you can possibly find. Just throw a couple of Y's in there and you're right.
The other interesting thing too with so now, like you said, you got Ben, you got Grindal, is whenever it was, so last time Kingsley Jones did one of those videos, he was talking about having there's they've been looking at a lot of guys overseas that are eligible for Canada. And at that time we were that's cool, but you got to bring them over here. Right. So I don't know if these are the guys that he's referring to or whatever, but
because he also mentioned some Kiwi
exactly
as well. So, and I've yet to see, and unless Sam Malcolm has found out his one of his grandparents was Canadian, then
I mean, if somebody could forge that passport for Malcolm, though, that would be delightful.
We've had enough issues with Spain and forging documentation. Let's not go down that route.
Well, I mean, I guess so. But you know what? Spain deserves to be at the World Cup anyways. But so it's I don't really know if these are the guys that Jones is referring to, or if this is the Arrows kind of going out on their own, doing their own scouting. Regardless, though, it's obviously, this is obviously what you want to see happening, right? Is kind of expanding the player pool for the men's national team, and finding those guys that are Canadian eligible that are able to come over and play. Obviously, the Arrows can immediately benefit by, as you said, not burning an international slot, which is beneficial because, as you also just said, they only have 8 of them so far as of right now. That could obviously change. More trades could be made.
Yeah, that's true.
But so it is something to consider right now. But it's also just, but it's also like a benefit of maybe getting and finding a lot more of those Canadian eligible players. Because I mean, we've seen a track record too already of, say, for example, a guy like Jason Higgins, who New York tried to sign. They realized he had a Canadian passport, right? So they alerted Toronto. Toronto signed him, and then he ended up on the national team like almost immediately, right? So I mean, there is a track record in Canada of it benefiting the national team, or at least at the very least, Kingsley Jones taking an interest in these guys and putting them in his squad, right? So who knows if that's on the cards for Grindal or Ben or anybody else in the future, but it's nice to kind of see the player pool expanding a little bit, and the Arrows putting in that work to make that happen, and bring a couple of the Canadian eligible guys back home, back to Canada, Toronto, and it's can't wait to see them in action. And it's I mean, I think just overall, it's like these signings are cool, man. Like they're every player that I've seen come that's been signed, it's it's an exciting addition. There looks like they're addressing some of the needs of the team and stuff. And then, like we kind of said, it's like kind of said before too, like it'll be interesting to see when more of the returning players start getting announced and how everybody's going to kind of get slotted in. But so that's I don't know. I don't really have much more to add on the Arrows. Unless you have something. Is there anything else that stood out for the rest of the league over the past couple of weeks? Or, I mean, even if you just kind of want to catch up on something that we haven't really talked about through the off season yet.
Yeah, well, there's something that happened today is that NOLA Gold announced their first new signing of the 2023 season. And if memory serves me correctly, and I'm just going to find it on, but there's going to be an issue for Canadian fans because it's basically two players with the same name. One's Canadian eligible, at least, and the other one, I'm not entirely sure, but obviously signing was just announced today. It's only been a couple of hours ago. We'll be able to go into their passport immediately, but unfortunately, is that there are now 2 Luke Campbells in the league, and unfortunately, the one from NOLA Gold is capped at international level for New Zealand, which is a shame, but also a scrum half, so a back. And the Luke Campbell we know is a forward that plays for Old Glory DC.
So, that's a good signing for NOLA though. Like that,
yeah, absolutely.
Stevens and Luke Campbell as your 2 nines. Like that's a pretty good signing. Like as far as not a lot of teams in MLR are going to have that type of depth at 9.
Yeah. Well, they've also signed Rodney Johanna.
Yeah.
As well.
Who tried to sign in the league earlier, but then
yeah, was that for NOLA or was for that another team?
Ooh, I think it was for somebody else, but I can't remember which team it was. Stuff we should look up before we do a podcast talking about this stuff there.
Well, they're not Canadian, so it's okay.
Yeah, unimportant.
But I mean, but imagine that combination, because Yona is a fly half, Campbell's a scrum half, both with Super Rugby experience.
Yeah, and be good, man.
Oh, as in obviously NOLA didn't have the best of seasons last year. Finishing 5th in the East, but that just gives the opportunity to turn things around and get the ball going for 2023. Big news out west, a trade between Utah and San Diego, and it appears that Mikey Te'o is returning to San Diego for the 2023 season. So I think that's obviously great for him, great for San Diego fans, but of course, that combination of Te'o and Oh my god, this is completely something. Cruze.
Cruze?
The Cruze Teo combo that scored so many tries in 2021 and 22 seasons. So yeah, I think bit of sadness to see that partnership dissolve, but obviously, Warriors and San Diego moving in different directions and hoping to both be fighting for the Shield again in the 2023 season. But yeah, a few moves going on. I would recommend to everyone, if you're not already following him, follow James Dealey on MLR Stats, where he'll be posting weekly updates of all the trades happening across MLR and which teams they're coming from and which teams they're going to. Now, we're going to try something new here, Derek, because one of our fans on Twitter, Peter Badovsky, recommended that we should talk about one of the rules of, or as we should say, laws.
I was going to say, I feel like if we're going to do this segment, we got to start saying laws, or we're just going to get yelled at for
the rules of rugby, the laws of the game, and explain that for new fans. And we're currently in September. The rugby season in Europe has just begun, and next thing we know, it's going to be the 2023 MLR season just around the corner. So I feel it's important that we should go over some of the rules. And, we'll start with an easy one to get everyone in, whether you're a new fan or you've been playing the game since as soon as you can walk. I think, good way to get involved. And so we're going to start off with law number 1, which is the ground. So let's begin with the playing area. Now, the playing area comprises the field of play and the in-goal area.
The field of play is that right? It's 94 to 100 meters long. See, I'm learning doing this. I thought it had to always be 100 meters long, and then 68 to 70 meters wide.
Yeah, the variances are due to when the game was first established in England, and also what stadiums could have or were allowed given, depending on what the local authorities would allow. So it has to be between, the smallest you can have is 94 meters long and 68 meters wide. But
funny, in high school, I played on a field that was 64 meters long. We weren't allowed to play too many games on it.
Fair enough. The in-goal area, so we talk about the field of play. The in-goal area, that's where tries can be scored, can be anywhere from 6 meters to 22 meters long. And again, it remains the same width between 68 and 70 meters.
Yeah, so there's and then also there's 3 bold lines that are on the field. The first one coming right in the middle, which is the halfway line, pretty self-explanatory, marks the halfway point. I was assuming it was 50 meters out, but I guess if your field's 94, it's somewhere else. I can't math half of 94, so I'm not going to. And then the other 2 lines are 22 meters away from the goal line or the try line, and yeah, it's 22 meters away, and that is a line that comes up in a whole lot of other laws that I guess we'll get into the more we kind of go through this.
Exactly. So that's what so whenever we're talking about a team's 22, that means 22 meters from the try line, that area there. And each side has the famous goalpost with the crossbar that's shaped like a capital H, and that is found halfway along the try line that leads to the in-goal area. The posts have to be a minimum of 3.4 meters tall and 5.6 meters wide. And the top edge of the crossbar, so the very top of the crossbar, has to be 3 meters above the playing area. And that is the laws when it comes to the grounds. There's obviously lots more details, including the first thing that comes up is the field should be safe to play on, which I think is very obvious. But if you want to find out...
You never know. What's the definition of safe, right?
Exactly. You
should define that.
Do you follow the letter of the law, or do you just interpret it as you will? But if you would like to find out more about the laws of the game, you can find them out. And the laws of international games and as well as MLR games, pretty much the same. There are a few variances. We will be talking about those as they appear. But if you'd like to find out more about the laws, especially the laws of the ground, you can do so on the World Rugby website, which is world.rugby.
I love that when we were planning this episode, we were both like, all right, let's pick like the easiest law to go through, because we're like, I'm pretty confident that I know what the field is supposed to look like. Also, we didn't really talk about any of like the other lines on it, I guess, in like the description of the rules, but there are the, the 5 meter hashes on all
There, yeah,
sides and stuff.
there's a 5 meter, there's 5 meters out of the playing
Yeah.
area, but that is known as the scrum zone. And I think we should talk about that when we bring up the
Oh,
scrum,
is that
which
what?
will be,
Yeah,
yeah,
that's what that's called.
it's a to be continued
To be
part of our
continued. Yeah,
podcast.
there's the 10 meter lines, which we came up in a try that we talked about last week when France off the restart, the ball didn't go 10, and then Lockie Kratz just took it anyways, and Webster
Yeah,
eventually scored. So that's one that kind of came in there. So there is a handful of other lines on it. I do kind of like somehow personally, I do kind of like how the law does allow for that little bit of variation and stuff.
mhm,
Because I think it's interesting how it gives a lot more like character and stuff
yeah,
to the pitches and the fields themselves, or
mhm,
even the stadiums themselves, right? Having everybody's ground be a little bit different instead of kind of a cookie cutter sort of situation, I mean, it's a lot a lot closer to like MLB, where it's like, okay, every stadium's got like a different height for their wall, or the foul territory
yeah,
is bigger, the walls further away or something, right? And it gives all the ballparks in baseball a little bit of their own personality, which is something that I do kind of think comes through in rugby a little bit, right? And even like the Toronto Arrows, right, being a team that plays at a university that has a football team that plays under Canadian rules, right?
mhm,
Meaning that the in goal areas in Toronto are a lot bigger than the in goal areas of basically every other team in the league.
yeah,
Because most of the MLR teams, if they're not in their own stadium, are playing on like an American football kind of stadiums designed to house American football that don't factor in the extra space for a massive in goal area, right? So
yeah,
everywhere, even in MLR, is a little bit different too, which
yeah,
I think always just adds to the fun. Um, I think it's just awesome that we picked the easiest rule and are still like stumbling and bumbling through this. So,
yeah.
I mean, I think it's fun. I think it's a really fun idea, and I hope I want to kind of keep revisiting it, pick some different laws. So thanks to Peter for the suggestion, and
Yeah.
I mean, we'll kind of keep going with it. We got to maybe get into some history of things and stuff too.
Yeah,
Off season, off
we'll see
season
what we can do.
topic ideas here.
Absolutely, absolutely. But well, that's the thing. If you want to see the dimensions of the pitch in live action and seeing live or on replay, we have got where you can watch the games this weekend. And we should say that the first game coming up is Canada versus Fijiana. Now, at the time of recording, they haven't announced what this will be broadcast on. However, seeing as kickoff is 2 a.m. Eastern time, it's probably going to be a replay. And considering that Canada women's games so far this year have been broadcast on TSN and the World Cup is going to be on TSN as well, we're just going to have a shot in the dark and say that this game will also be on TSN, mainly tsn.ca and the TSN app. One thing that we do know will be on tsn.ca and the app is the final round of this year's Rugby Championship. And, it's been close so far. It seems like New Zealand have just pulled ahead, but you never know what's going to happen in the final round and who can take the trophy.
Well,
And
the All Blacks have Aquaman now, so
no, that is true.
I don't know if you saw that, but like Aquaman's hanging out with them this week. So I mean, how do you lose with Aquaman, right?
Yeah, that
Especially
is true.
head tattooed Aquaman.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. And if you are looking for European rugby, well, top 14, can't help you. No idea where you can watch it in Canada. However, if you want to watch the Premiership and URC, you can find it on Sportsnet. And that is all we have for this episode of the podcast. A very short one, but obviously little news. We're hoping there'll be a bit more to talk about next week, or if not, we may talk about two of the laws of the game. Depends on how much detail we can go into.
We're gonna have a game to talk about.
That is true.
We got
that
a game
is true.
to talk about. Yeah,
that is true. But yes, if you enjoyed listening to this episode of the podcast, you can listen to more on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Anchor FM. If you enjoy watching our faces, you can do so on our YouTube channel. That'll be at the Rouge Rugby. And you can find us across all social media platforms, including Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at the Rouge Rugby. Maybe leave us a suggestion of which rule or law of the game that you would like us to talk about. Derek, where can the people find you online?
I'm at Brissette the Jet across all social media platforms, and you can also find me at the Walrus on Friday night. I've mentioned a handful of times that I play Aussie rules football, and our team, the Toronto Dingoes, is hosting an AFL Grand Final party. I'll see if I can get the Canada Fiji game to just go on right after that game's finished, and then we can all hang out well into the early hours of the morning. But yeah, the Walrus doors open at 9. I think the game starts at like 12:30 in the morning. So if you just want to hang out, come on down there. That's my shameless self-plug for the Toronto Dingoes AFL Grand Final party. Some pretty good games so far in the playoffs. There was a pretty epic Swans Pies game last weekend, so hopefully we get more of that. The teams are the Sydney Swans and the Geelong Cats. So if that means anything to you, then you should come on down.
And you can find me on social media platforms at Hardman, spelled H4RDMAN. Well, that's it for this week's episode of the podcast. Derek, thank you for joining me. And thank you all for joining us for another episode talking about real Canadian rugby. We hope you can join us again next time.